The year is 1923 in Germany. A period of hyperinflation has utterly annihilated the national currency. A simple loaf of bread commands a price of 200 billion marks. Desperate citizens burn banknotes for fuel, as it proves more economical than purchasing firewood. Then, in 1929, the Great Depression strikes. Financial institutions fail. Industrial plants shutter. By 1933, unemployment afflicts 6 million Germans, representing 30% of the labour force. Starvation becomes a public spectacle on city streets. This is the devastated nation Adolf Hitler assumes control of in January 1933. A country subjected to dual economic obliteration. Yet merely 6 years later, in 1939, a radical transformation has occurred. Germany invades Poland with a force of 3 million soldiers, 3,000 tanks, and 4,000 aircraft, constituting the most advanced military apparatus in Europe. Within half a decade, this bankrupt state constructed the world's most formidable war machine. How was this possible? The explanation entails a fictitious corporation, a financial sorcerer, and a Ponzi scheme of national proportions. The MEFO bills, a shadow banking mechanism that financed Nazi rearmament while concealing it from global scrutiny. By 1939, these financial obligations were maturing, and Germany lacked the capital to honour them. Consequently, the regime had no alternative but to invade neighbouring nations to stave off economic disintegration. The Nazi economy was not founded solely on ideology. It was constructed upon a financial deception that demanded perpetual expansion to endure. This is the story of how Hitler funded World War II and why impending economic catastrophe rendered conflict unavoidable. Before we proceed, consider this scenario. It is January 1939. You are Germany's foremost economist. You comprehend that the economy is on the verge of collapse. You recognize that Hitler's sole recourse is war. Do you voice your concerns, risking execution, or remain complicit through silence? Actual individuals confronted this precise dilemma. By the conclusion of this narrative, you will apprehend why every alternative was catastrophic. If you appreciate historical analysis that provokes contemplation, please subscribe. We commence with the crisis that enabled this entire sequence. To grasp Germany's desperation, one must examine both cataclysmic events. First, the hyperinflation of 1923. By November of that year, at the zenith of Weimar hyperinflation, a single US dollar was valued at 4 trillion marks. Labourers demanded twice daily payment at midday and following their shifts, because wages earned in the morning were worthless by evening. Restaurants revised their pricing while patrons dined, with waiters ascending tables every 30 minutes to announce new costs. Life insurance policies, into which families had invested for decades, matured into sums insufficient to purchase a postage stamp. This transcended economic crisis. It was an economic apocalypse. The savings, pensions, and investments of the German middle class were eradicated overnight. Germany experienced a gradual recovery. The currency stabilized. Existence began to normalize. Then came 1929 and the Great Depression. American banks recalled their loans. German enterprises collapsed. Unemployment skyrocketed. By 1932, 6 million Germans were jobless. Families auctioned their furniture on thoroughfares to buy sustenance. Engineers and teachers begged for manual labour. The Weimar government was paralysed. Political violence was incessant. Street battles between communists and Nazis transformed urban centres into combat zones. Germany had been economically demolished twice within 14 years. This is the environment that propelled Hitler to power. In January 1933, Hitler pledged to restore German grandeur, to rebuild the military, and to defy the Treaty of Versailles. However, Germany was insolvent. The Versailles Treaty restricted Germany to 100,000 soldiers, with prohibitions on tanks, aircraft, submarines, and heavy artillery. Furthermore, Germany possessed no capital for such construction regardless. Hitler required a massive, clandestine rearmament, imperceptible to external observers until it was irreversible, and he had to achieve it with an economy devastated twice. Enter Hjalmar Schacht, the individual who would render this feasible. Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht, born 1877, was a banker, economist, and financial virtuoso. He had already salvaged Germany once. In 1923, as currency commissioner, Schacht terminated the hyperinflation by introducing a new currency backed by land. It succeeded. The Rentenmark stabilized, and Schacht attained legendary status. On March 17, 1933, Hitler appointed him president of the Reichsbank, Germany's central bank. In August 1934, Schacht assumed the role of Minister of Economics. Schacht's mission: finance massive rearmament without detection, without inciting inflation, and without revealing the scale of Germany's activities. Schacht was brilliant, and he devised a strategy. Hitler's challenge was thus: Germany needed to construct tanks, planes, ships, and weaponry. This necessitated payments to steel conglomerates, arms manufacturers, and chemical plants. However, if the Reichsbank merely printed currency for these payments, two consequences ensued. First, inflation would explode anew, a prospect Germans, having endured 1923, would not tolerate. Second, the transactions would appear on official Reichsbank statements. Foreign governments would observe them, deduce Germany's rearmament, and intervene before Germany was prepared. Hitler required invisible currency, money that neither triggered inflation nor appeared on official ledgers. Schacht engineered it. In 1934, he established a company, Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft MBH, Metallurgical Research Company Limited, abbreviated MEFO. On paper, it was a research consortium. 4 major German corporations, Siemens, Krupp, Rheinmetall, and Gute Hoffnungshütte, held shares in MEFO, which had a nominal capitalization of merely 1 million Reichsmarks. In reality, MEFO was inert, a shell corporation, a fictitious entity with stationery and a bank account. Yet MEFO was destined to fund the largest rearmament initiative in history. This is how the mechanism functioned. Imagine you are a German arms manufacturer in 1935. The government orders 1,000 tanks from you, but instead of Reichsmarks, you receive payment in MEFO bills. These bills were promissory notes issued by the fictitious MEFO company, essentially checks guaranteeing payment in 5 years. Unwilling to wait, you require immediate capital for payroll and materials. Thus, you present these MEFO bills to a private German bank. The bank, aware that MEFO is backed by the Reichsbank and that the Reichsbank will honor these obligations, provides you with cash, real Reichsmarks, perhaps at a minor discount. You are satisfied. You have been compensated. Here is where the artifice transpires. The private bank now possesses MEFO bills. It presents them to the Reichsbank, which converts them into cash using its currency issuing authority. Crucially, these transactions never materialize on the official Reichsbank balance sheet. MEFO bills were private obligations, not government or Reichsbank debt. Officially, they were liabilities of a private research firm. Consequently, when foreign governments scrutinized Germany's finances, this colossal rearmament expenditure remained invisible. Between 1934 and 1938, Germany issued 12 billion Reichsmarks in MEFO bills. For context, Germany's entire national debt in 1932 approximated 10 billion Reichsmarks. Germany had clandestinely incurred obligations exceeding its total pre-Nazi debt to fund rearmament, and no external entity comprehended the full magnitude until it was too late. By 1936, Germany had violated every military restriction of the Versailles Treaty. It possessed tanks, aircraft, submarines, and a modern army. The Allies did not intervene because they failed to recognize the extent of the progression. However, a critical flaw existed. Those MEFO bills matured in 5 years. The initial bills, issued in 1934, were due in 1939, and Germany lacked the 12 billion Reichsmarks for redemption. The countdown commenced, and herein the Ponzi scheme analogy becomes precise. A Ponzi scheme operates by promising investors elevated returns, paying early investors with capital from subsequent investors. It functions only while new capital influx continues. Eventually, new investors are exhausted and the scheme implodes. The Nazi economy operated identically. MEFO bills were deferred payment promises. Germany intended to utilize future economic growth for settlement, but by 1938, the economy could not generate sufficient revenue. The scheme required fresh capital. How does one procure 12 billion Reichsmarks when the domestic economy cannot produce it? One appropriates it from others. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria, the Anschluss, seizing its gold reserves, foreign currency, and industrial assets. In September 1938, via the Munich Agreement, Germany annexed the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. In March 1939, Germany occupied the remainder of Czechoslovakia, confiscating its gold reserves and the Škoda works, among Europe's most advanced armaments factories. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, appropriating its agricultural output, natural resources, and millions of potential forced labourers. The Nazi economy was not merely immoral, it was structurally dependent on conquest. As one historian noted, they had to invade a couple of countries for it to work. Hjalmar Schacht foresaw this inevitability. By 1937, he cautioned Hitler that the economy was overheating, expenditures were unsustainable, and collapse was imminent. Hitler disregarded him. On January 7, 1939, weeks before the first MEFO bills matured, Schacht submitted a dire report from the Reichsbank directors, urging severe reduction of rearmament spending, expenditure cuts, and budget balancing as the sole method to prevent inflation. Hitler's response on January 20, 1939, was to dismiss Schacht as Reichsbank president. Schacht had constructed the apparatus, but he had also embedded a time bomb. Hitler's solution was to prevent detonation through constant acquisition, feeding the mechanism with Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and ultimately France and the Soviet Union. The war was not solely ideological, it was an economic imperative. By 1939, Germany confronted two alternatives: economic collapse or territorial expansion. Hitler selected expansion. Yet MEFO bills were not the sole revenue stream. The Nazi economy possessed other, more sinister sources. Upon conquering a nation, Germany implemented systematic plunder: gold reserves, foreign currency, artworks, industrial equipment, and raw materials. In France, Germany imposed occupation costs, compelling France to pay 400 million francs daily for its own subjugation. In the Soviet Union, Germany planned to extract grain, oil, and minerals to sustain its war machine. The entire economic model was parasitic. Subsequently, there was slave labor. Concentration camp prisoners were utilized as forced labor in German factories, producing weapons, manufacturing components, and mining coal. Corporations like IG Farben, Siemens, and Krupp exploited this labor. Prisoners were worked to exhaustion and death, only to be replaced. The Nazi economy was not merely funded by theft, it was erected upon slavery, an economic structure integral to genocide. Another swindle illustrates the profundity of this theft: the Volkswagen, the people's car. Germans were encouraged to save through the Deutsche Arbeitsfront, making incremental payments toward a future automobile. 275 million Reichsmarks were collected from German savers. How many civilian Volkswagens were delivered during the Third Reich? 0. The factory was converted to military production for the Kübelwagen, a military vehicle. German savers forfeited everything, receiving no compensation until the 1960s. The Nazi economy pilfered from its own populace as well. A further scheme involved foreign loans. In the 1920s and early 1930s, Germany borrowed substantial sums from Britain, France, and the United States, ostensibly to pay Versailles reparations. Germany accepted the funds. Hitler ceased reparations payments in 1933, but retained the borrowed capital. Thus, Germany utilized money lent by Britain and France to construct the army that would later invade them. When Germany invaded France in 1940, the new Vichy government forgave a portion of this debt, effectively granting Germany gratuitous capital from its future adversaries. Finally, the confiscation of Jewish property constituted systematic larceny. Businesses, bank accounts, residences, and artworks were seized by the state, sold, and the proceeds used to finance the regime. This was not merely persecution, it was methodical theft funding the government. Thus, by 1939, the Nazi economy operated on MEFO bills, plunder, slave labor, and theft, none of it sustainable. The economy teetered on the brink of collapse. MEFO bills were maturing. Germany could not honor them without further plunder. The economy was overheated, inflation resurfaced, and shortages emerged. Schacht's warnings were validated. Instead of retrenchment, Germany accelerated, as retrenchment meant economic collapse, unemployment, political crisis, and the termination of the Nazi regime. Hitler's only recourse was forward advancement. This is the element frequently misunderstood about Nazi Germany. The war was not merely ideological, it was an economic necessity. The Nazi economy was engineered to require expansion. Without conquest, it would collapse. As historian Adam Tooze argued in The Wages of Destruction, the making and breaking of the Nazi economy, Nazi Germany existed on borrowed time from its inception. Its economic model demanded perpetual warfare for survival. The 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union was motivated not solely by Lebensraum or racial ideology, but by the imperative for Caucasian oil, Ukrainian grain, and resources to prevent economic implosion. The war was the economy, and the economy was the war. When Germany began losing territory in 1943 to 44, the economic model disintegrated. No further plunder, only endless expenditure. The Nazi economy was a pyramid scheme, and like all such schemes, it ultimately collapsed. In synthesis, how did Hitler finance World War II? He did not. The Nazi economy rested upon 4 pillars. 1. Creative accounting. MEFO bills permitted Germany to conceal 12 billion Reichsmarks in off-balance sheet debt, enabling clandestine rearmament. Hjalmar Schacht's genius created invisible money, but it remained debt requiring eventual settlement. 2. Plunder. Germany funded the war by looting every conquered nation, Austrian gold, Czechoslovakian arms factories, French occupation payments, Soviet grain, Polish labor. The economy was parasitic, requiring perpetual new hosts. 3. Slavery. Concentration camp prisoners, prisoners of war, and forced laborers from occupied territories were worked to death in German factories, producing weapons to conquer additional nations for further enslavement. This economic model was inextricable from genocide. 4. Theft. From Jewish property and Versailles loan defaults to the Volkswagen swindle and defrauding German savers, every facet of Nazi economics involved uncompensated appropriation. Was Nazi Germany a Ponzi scheme? Fundamentally, yes. Early investors were paid with capital from later investors, where the later investors were nations and payment was conquest. MEFO bills matured in 1939. Germany lacked the funds, thus it invaded Poland. Loot from Poland funded campaigns in France. Loot from France funded the invasion of the Soviet Union. While Germany continued winning and acquiring, the scheme functioned. The moment expansion ceased, the entire structure collapsed. This explains the inevitability of war. By 1939, Hitler faced 2 options: expand or collapse. The Nazi economy was not designed for peace. It was architected for war. Thus, Hitler paid for World War II with unfulfillable promises, non-existent capital, stolen resources, and enslaved labor. The Nazi war machine was not funded by economic robustness, but by a fraud that demanded constant conquest to avert collapse. When conquest terminated, the economy perished alongside the regime. A concluding question for contemplation. Knowing the Nazi economy required perpetual expansion for survival, was war inevitable? Could Germany have reversed course and transitioned to a sustainable economy? Share your perspectives. If this analysis has altered your comprehension of Nazi Germany's economy, please affirm with a positive response and subscribe for further historical content connecting economics, politics, and warfare. Thank you for your engagement.